Hello, welcome to Design Time. I'm Jackie Lacey. This week we're continuing our series on the elements and principles of design, and we're going to focus on texture this week. Texture is, just like line, can make or break a design. And remember that texture is the surface quality of almost every material. Well, actually, every material does have some sort of surface quality, but it's what can be either seen or touched, and they come in so many different types of texture. One thing that texture will do for a design is to really create interest with what you're seeing. If you think about those bouquets that were very popular several years ago, sort of like an ice cream cone shaped bouquet of roses, all the brides had to have them, but it was paved, it was very dome shaped, all were the same level. That velvety texture of the rose was virtually the only texture that you had in the design. While it was beautiful to look at, and a lot of people loved it, it's not quite as interesting as far as a photograph is concerned because of being one flat type of texture. Remember that texture is one of the elements and principles of design. Again, you can find it in your AIFD guide to floral design. It's actually on page 101. We're not going to go each element one after the other as they're listed. We're going to do them as they come along and as people request them. And texture was one of those things that was requested this week. One of the reasons that we really want to focus on texture is because, as we talked about, it can make or break your design. Having too many textures in a design can be confusing. You don't really know where to look. You don't know where to touch. But having something that people want to go up and touch and look at and feel is one of the biggest compliments I can ever receive as a floral designer, because if I've done something that creates interest and draws someone in, makes them want to touch and see how it's put together, see how that feels, then that really makes me want to do that more often. I want people to appreciate the things that we do. And as you begin to put your designs and your compositions together, you want to make sure that you're incorporating several different types of texture. Remember that most foliage can have a very flat, sort of shiny, glossy kind of surface. It's very clean, it's very smooth. It can be veiny and pointy like this, but virtually it's just a smooth surface. You want to make sure that you're combining foliages so that to create some interest, you have something that's a little feathery, something that's a little soft, plumosa, tree fern, other types of foliages like that, layered in on top of those shiny green leaves like the Fatsia or Magnolia. Love Magnolia because you've got both sides, that beautiful brown rich side and then that rich green glossy side as well. But mixing or combining two different types, sometimes three different types of foliage, is incredibly popular and very trendy right now. So the more foliages that you can mix together, the more texture that you can automatically begin to create, because some of them are going to demand space, some of them are going to want to have that room to breathe and just sort of shelter or lay around the design to be able to soften up the other foliages. And then as we begin to look at the floral products, roses have that beautiful velvety texture that painters have been trying to capitalize on forever. It's very hard to be able to paint the texture of a rose because of that velvety, smooth, yet almost like it's got little fur on there. It's just very interesting when you really look at it. And then with things like the dianthus, you get that feathery mass touch as you begin to look at it. As we look at hydrangea, which is also incredibly popular right now, we get that sort of rough composite that's on there. Again, something that we want to touch. It is amazing that one of the first things that people want to do when they look at floral products is, of course, smell it to see what fragrance is there. But the touch, what draws you in, is another thing that people are really going to want to experience. As you begin to layer the different styles of texture together, the roughness of the hydrangea, the velvety sort of almost feathery like dianthus or carnation, the velvety texture of the rose, the smoothness of the foliage. As you can see, we've got several different types of texture going on in here, and we want to look at it. We want to go over and play around and see how it's put together. When you start to use foliages like we've done here with the equisetum by wadding it up and sort of creating something that's a little more interesting rather than just the rigidness of that very straight line item like we talked about last week, you can see how it also starts to add depth into your design. Some texture can take it from being very flat to having that different heights of products that are in that composition. So make sure that you think about that as you begin to pull the products that you're going to place together, and then how are you going to work them together. Again, you want the eye to move through from the line, and you want people to actually touch it because of the texture. If we're working on something like this that's very tall and very vertical, you might want to put a bit more texture down here like we've created with the leaves here, because again, it helps to add that depth in there. We've mixed and mingled the floral products in there. Doesn't take a whole lot of product to get a lot of texture within there. And then our great friends at Syndicate have come out with this line of mosses that are bagged and ready to go that also can really create a lot of depth in the basing techniques that you're going to add into your composition or your floral designs. There's moss, there's Spanish moss, there's reindeer moss, there's bark, there's rock. There's a lot of different types of texture that can be used to base each of those designs together. And then as you're looking at utilizing other products together, like the succulents, the tillandsia, we've got a moss-covered orb that's stuck in here with that beautiful white protea, then we can see how those textures start to create interest and want to draw us right in there too. So think about texture as something that you want to have soft and hard, waxy and velvety, things that are going to be opposite of each other, are going to create interest, but make sure that you limit it to no more probably than 3 or 5 if you're competing or if you are going for your certification. But then also, if you are sending something out that you want people to really appreciate, go for it. Because I love texture like this that has several different types in there. Remember, every surface quality does have one. As we were discussing, the Syndicate Bella Moss collection is a great way to add texture in your composition for a basing technique. And remember, a basing is what you're covering your mechanics with. This has reindeer moss, Spanish moss, bark, different colors, different types, different textures that can be worked in together to add that texture that you were looking for. They also have a selection of colors that are available that work really well with the compositions that you're going to create. Remember, one of the important things about utilizing texture for a basing technique, it covers your mechanics, and you want to make sure that you're spot on with making sure all your mechanics are covered. So it can be something that you can add in before you begin or layer it in after you've finished the composition to make sure they're all covered, especially for those of you that are testing. It's one of the things that we're going to look for to make sure no mechanics can be seen unless they're supposed to be part of the finished design. As we begin to look at the textures within these 3 designs, one of the things that we want to talk about is the way that texture can be used to create some depth within the design. When we look at this, we can see that the floral product is extended up above the lip of the container, but it really looks like there's more in there because of the action and motion. This is dynamic line that's been combined with some great texture. We've got that pin cushion, which is sort of prickly looking. We've got the smoothness of the lily. We've got the smooth foliage that's added in there. And then there's even a bit of texture on the surface of the equisetum. So you have different textures that are working together to create some depth. As we begin to layer in more and more of the designs, we can see that by adding different types of texture really does draw your eye right into the center of that. You want to see how it's put together. This sheltering technique that we've done with the foliage that we've looped over the top of it just helps create a little bit of depth in something that would normally be very flat. We've layered in some of that birch bark to separate our floral products as we've grouped and clustered them together. Again, we've got the hydrangea, which is sort of a mass. It's definitely a mass flower, but it's almost like a rigid, very coarse kind of surface on there. The velvety texture of the roses, the combination of the dianthus with the beautiful delicate petals that are all bunched together, making it almost sort of coarse. So you can see how texture really does work together, and sometimes even in one design or one floral product you may have several different types. We've got smooth, we've got waxy, we have velvety, we have sort of coarse, you can almost hear it on the surface of the equisetum, and then we've got prickly with the pincushion. The combination of those textures really help to add interest within the design. As we look at the plant product, think about how the fresh tillandsia is going to have almost that furry kind of Chanel type of surface on the top of it, rather than just a slick surface. And then by adding in this moss ball, we've taken a product that is normally very coarse and we have commanded it with our bind wire and our bullion, and we've sort of controlled it a bit so that it looks very clean. And then adding in those beautiful succulents and the king protea in here with its sort of rigid, again, prickly surface on the floral part, and then the waxy part on the foliage. Really do bring all those textures together, create interest within the finished composition, and make you want to go up and touch it. And that's a great compliment. Join us again next time for Design Time. If you enjoyed that video and you'd like to see more, click the subscribe button.